In this video, we are going to use the human metabolism as a magnificent example for chemical reaction engineering. So we are going to have a chemical reaction engineering perspective of human metabolism and how alternative reactions can change how our metabolism behaves. It is possible to observe this through observing ourselves. So let us start by looking at this cartoon, which represents a human metabolism, respiratory and circulatory systems. Now, we have two processes as far as our respiratory system is concerned: inhalation and exhalation. During inhalation, we take in oxygen and nitrogen, of course, and in our lungs, our blood cells exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. So our blood cells house carbon dioxide and oxygen, pretty much using the same type of active sites. And active sites is a term that we use in catalysis, and the term actually reflects what our blood cells do very well. Now, when we inhale, we bring in high pressure gas, air, into our lungs, while the blood cells in our lungs see the chemical potential of the oxygen molecules, and oxygen molecules are taken by the sites where carbon dioxide molecules were adsorbing. So there's an exchange mechanism in lieu of the chemical potential difference. In other words, the chemical potential of oxygen on the blood cells has to be higher than that of carbon dioxide for oxygen and carbon dioxide to change place. Or in other words, if oxygen is binding a little bit more strongly to the blood cells, that carbon dioxide has to relinquish its site to oxygen. And then, of course, carbon dioxide is in the gas phase, and the carrier gas, nitrogen, takes away the carbon dioxide, unreacted oxygen, and of course some water vapor. So let's take this and let's evolve this story into a combustion reaction that is going to take place in our cells, in the mitochondria of our cells. So we have a blood cell. So this is a blood cell. And of course, from chemical reaction engineering perspective, I don't have to be technically accurate. I just generate a system and call it what it represents. So this is my blood cell. Now my blood cell can carry two molecules, oxygen and carbon dioxide. When oxygen is there, carbon dioxide isn't. When carbon dioxide is there, oxygen isn't. So this is you can consider this as a one-person bicycle. So either we have oxygen or we have carbon dioxide in this blood cell. So once, say, oxygen is residing in this blood cell, that it has placed itself in this blood cell, now the circulatory system, the pipelines in our body, the circulatory system takes oxygen to the cells wherever they are needed, and the blood cell discharges its how in the coordinate that needs this oxygen. So let us draw a pipeline. Let's draw a pipeline between the point that we are at and the point that this oxygen is going to be utilized. All right, this pipeline is our veins. All right, and the blood cells are being transported through our veins to the mitochondria. Of course, things are not to the scale, and we are just generating a chemical engineer's perspective. Things are not drawn to the scale, but understanding the physics and chemistry of the problem is important here. Now, when the blood cell approaches to the site that is going to have a deficiency in oxygen and a demand for oxygen, the chemical potential difference is going to transfer oxygen from this blood cell to where it is needed. So our oxygen is in our combustion chamber, the mitochondria. In the combustion chamber, we have a hydrocarbon, all right, carbohydrates, sugars, whichever fuel that our particular cell is using. That combustion produces heat, all right? Because of that heat, locally that cell gets hot, and because of that high temperature, the heat is being transported out of that cell to the rest of the body, all right? And of course, there is another product. There are two other products, H2O and carbon dioxide. Now, transport of H2O is relatively easy. It can just find itself in the fluid domain. Transport of carbon dioxide requires backhaul from the site that this transporter blood cell has vacated by downloading oxygen to the mitochondria. Now, the same blood cell in a return cycle, now our return cycle has to go through a different circulatory system. Things shouldn't mix, all right? So this is the return cycle, all right? It's the blood cell now has the howl of carbon dioxide. All right? So we have fluid transport, mass transfer, and heat transfer in just simple combustion that is taking place at every second in our bodies. All of these processes are taking place, and all of us are going through these processes without ever at all thinking about it. Now let's disturb the system. How can we disturb the system? We can disturb the system by, for example, the need to do excessive work that we started running. Our muscles need to do work on the fuel that is inherent in our bodies. Now, in order to convert the fuel to work, to running process, we have to first generate heat. Heat generation is here. Heat generation has to increase. In order to increase this heat generation, I have to combust faster. In order to combust faster, I have to transport oxygen faster. In order to transport the oxygen faster, I have to have both my circulatory system and respiratory system work faster. In other words, my heart has to pump blood faster, and my lungs have to pump oxygen faster. So we breathe faster so that the combustion in our combustion chambers have to take place faster so that we can exert the energy. Now, this is something quite positive about our respiratory system. Now, let's just have a negative example. The negative example is smoking. So, now we have a cigarette. And we inhaled, all right? So the smoking, of course, brings in a lot of chemicals, a lot of chemical vapors into our respiratory and circulatory system. But one of those chemicals is carbon monoxide. So carbon monoxide is going to be the molecule of our interest. So we have a lot of chemicals, but also carbon monoxide in this cigarette smoke. Carbon monoxide is in the same family of the carbon oxides, but the difference between carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide is that in carbon dioxide we have a carbon monoxide and another oxygen. All right? So this is our carbon dioxide. The fact that we have this second oxygen here, it saturates all the bonds of carbon that carbon is not craving for new bonds. So carbon monoxide has craving bonds that needs to be saturated, and oxygen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide bind to same kinds of sites, same kinds of active sites. The fact that we can oxidize carbon monoxide catalytically on these type of sites means that they crave for the same type of sites in our circulatory system, in our blood cells. So now we are going to have this site, the seat, the chair that these molecules can sit upon, all right? That on this chair, you can represent this as a chair, or you can represent this as a bicycle that our molecules can ride, all right? Only one molecule can reside. In the normal operation of this process, oxygen takes the ride, goes and gets rested in the combustion chamber. While the site is vacated, carbon dioxide produced in this cell is being transported back to the heart, then to the lungs, then out. All right? But now when carbon monoxide sits on these chairs, it sits forever. All right? Carbon monoxide doesn't leave this seat because it has bonds craving to be saturated, all right? And these bonds, once contacted with the active carrier sites of the blood cell, that it is impossible to release them, almost impossible to release them, all right? This process is called carbon monoxide poisoning, both in literal and figurative sense. The literal sense that carbon monoxide is toxic, that if we inhale carbon monoxide, it eventually causes death. The figurative sense of the toxicity of carbon monoxide is in the catalysis vocabulary. Carbon monoxide poisons the active sites. Carbon monoxide poisoning is an important problem in catalysis, especially in a fuel cell catalysis. If carbon monoxide is excessive on the surface of a catalyst, it forms islands and it inhibits further reactions to take place. Now let's come back to our example of human circulation. In the human circulation system, now instead of oxygen, my blood cell is poisoned with carbon monoxide. My blood cell is poisoned with carbon monoxide, and this poisoned blood cell is being circulating in my metabolism. And that cell is poisoned now. It cannot carry oxygen. It cannot carry carbon dioxide. What are we going to do? Now, we are constructed for survival. Now, mitochondria demands oxygen. Heart receives the signal of excess oxygen, just like it received the signal when we were running, when mitochondria was needing oxygen. So it starts, gets the signal that oxygen is being needed, so it starts pumping more blood, right? In order to pump more blood, number one, the heart rate must increase. And number two, the pressure at the arteries have to increase in order to pump the fluid rapidly. All right? The pump rate is going to increase, the pump is going to beat faster, and the pressure at the arteries is going to increase. And remember, our arteries are flexible components that they can expand and they can contract. Now, if we take a flexible hose and connect it to a pump, all right, this is the pumps that we use in our laboratories and in industry. If we take a flexible hose and connect to this pump, and if the flexibility of this hose and the strength of this hose is designed for a particular pressure P1, and if the fluid pressure at the exit of this pump, inlet of this flexible hose, is higher than the intrinsic flexibility, intrinsic strength of this hose, what will happen is that if this pressure is greater than this P1 that this hose can sustain, first that hose is going to expand, and then it will eventually rupture. All right? First the hose is going to expand, and it is going to eventually rupture. Unless, of course, if this hose has an internal control mechanism that it shouldn't expand farther than this thickness, it will start to protect itself. All right? It will strengthen itself. And that's what happens in our arteries in many cases, in many situations, that our body has a self-protective mechanism of withstanding those high pressures, and therefore the blood vessels are started to become more and more rigid in order to sustain these higher and higher pressures that are required because we have poisoned our blood cells, and in order to transport sufficient oxygen to the combustion chambers, our heart has to work faster. All right? So this heart working faster is the primary mechanism that the smoking has an influence in human body, and this heart rate increasing is the result. It results in the expansion and also the hardening of the blood veins. So, on the overall, the chemical process in the human body has to go through reactions, transport, adsorption and desorption, and a lot of fluid mechanics. So this is an excellent example to summarize what's happening in a human body in relationship to the chemical reaction processes. So let's take our understanding one step further, and let's see how the pulsating dynamics are being compensated for the continuum. Now, pulsating dynamics means that I'm going to inhale and exhale, and I have two processes. Instead of a one single continuous process, I have two processes, inhalation and exhalation. In other words, my combustion chamber receives oxygen, discards carbon dioxide, receives oxygen again. So how am I going to establish the continuum? I'm going to establish the continuum by operating a lot of cells in unison. So while this cell is discarding oxygen, discarding carbon dioxide, this cell is intaking oxygen. And so forth. And as a result, I have a continuous process. So this is moment 1. In moment 2, depending upon our metabolic rate, that this cell and its neighbor is going to change the task. This cell has discarded its carbon dioxide. Now it can intake oxygen. And this cell is then, with its combustion, it will discard carbon dioxide. And of course, this is taking place in unison with the blood cells also, that they have to collaborate. So here we have same cells taking in oxygen, producing carbon dioxide, and this cycle continues. If I interrupt it by some means, such as absence of oxygen and in the presence of carbon monoxide, of course, all of this steady process is disrupted. And how it's disrupted depends on the individual's metabolism.